What if I told you that the most desired woman in America was also the most hunted, not by fans, not by photographers, by her own government? The FBI had a file on her, the CIA was recording her phone calls, and 2 days before she died, a classified memo landed on the desk of the most powerful spy in America. It was about her, just her, and what she knew. 3 days later, Marilyn Monroe was dead. This is not a story about a tragic actress. This is not a story about pills and loneliness and a life that burned too bright and too fast. This is a story about a woman who got too close to the most powerful men in the world, learned things she was never supposed to know, and became, without ever intending to, the single most dangerous civilian in America. Her name in the CIA files was simply Subject Monroe, and by the summer of 1962, Subject Monroe had become a problem. Part 1: The File. J. Edgar Hoover kept files on everyone. That was his power. That was his protection. That was how one man held the most powerful city in the world, Washington, D.C., in the palm of his hand for nearly 50 years. Politicians, judges, generals, presidents. He had something on all of them. And in 1955, he opened a file on Marilyn Monroe. Now here is the detail that matters. The very first page of Monroe's FBI file was copied to the CIA. Not summarized. Not referenced. Copied. Directly. Think about what that means. When the FBI opens a file on an actress and immediately shares it with the CIA. This is not routine procedure. This is a decision. Someone, somewhere in the highest levels of American intelligence, looked at Marilyn Monroe and decided she was worth watching. Not because she was famous. Because of who she was getting close to. And she was getting close to everyone. That was the thing about Marilyn that the world saw as glamour and the government saw as a threat. She moved between worlds that were never supposed to touch. Hollywood and Washington. Celebrity and power. The visible and the classified. She had dinner with senators and studio executives in the same week. She knew mob bosses by first name. She moved through the Kennedy orbit with an ease that should have been impossible for a woman with her background. An orphan from Burbank, a girl who had grown up with nothing. And yet there she was. In the rooms where the real decisions were made. Listening. Part 2: What she knew. By 1961, the situation had become serious. Monroe's relationship with John Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, had moved beyond the occasional encounter. There were phone calls. Late at night. Through intermediaries. Through Peter Lawford, Kennedy's brother-in-law, who served as the bridge between Hollywood and the White House and understood instinctively that his job was to make things happen and make sure no one talked about them afterward. But people talked. And Monroe listened. And Kennedy, perhaps because he trusted her, perhaps because he was careless, perhaps because power makes men believe they are untouchable, talked more than he should have. What did he tell her? The CIA files, partially released under the Freedom of Information Act, reference several categories of classified information that Monroe had been exposed to. Cuba. The agency's ongoing attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro. Operations so sensitive that even their code names were classified. Monroe had been in rooms where these things were discussed, not as a participant, not as an operative, but as a woman that powerful men forgot to be careful around. The Mafia connection. The extraordinary, deeply illegal arrangement by which the CIA had contracted organized crime to assist in its Cuban operations. Sam Giancana. Johnny Rosselli. Names that should never have appeared in the same sentence as the word government. Monroe knew these names. She had met some of these men socially. She understood, at least partially, what they represented. And then. The third thing. The thing that the CIA memo from August 3, 1962. Written 2 days before her death, signed by the Chief of Counterintelligence himself, references only in the most careful, oblique language. A visit by the President to a secret air base. And what he saw there. Part 3, The Roswell Connection. Roswell, New Mexico. Something fell from the sky. The United States Army Air Force said it was a weather balloon. They said it quickly. Too quickly. And then they stopped talking about it entirely. For 15 years, the official position was silence. But inside the highest levels of American government, the conversation never stopped. And somewhere in the years between 1959 and 1962, John Kennedy told Marilyn Monroe what he knew. He described, according to the CIA memo, a visit to what the document calls a secret air base, for the purpose of, and these are the document's own words, inspecting things from outer space. Whether Kennedy was telling the truth, whether he was exaggerating, whether he was testing her, we don't know. What we know is that Monroe believed him. And she wrote it down. Part 4, The Red Diary. Everyone who knew Marilyn Monroe in the last years of her life mentioned the diary. Small. Red. Leather-covered. She carried it everywhere. She called it her book of secrets. It was exactly that. The diary contained, according to people who claimed to have seen it, entries that read less like personal reflections and more like intelligence reports. Names. Dates. Locations. Fragments of conversations that had taken place in rooms where no record was supposed to exist. The CIA knew about the diary. The FBI knew about the diary. And by the summer of 1962, both agencies were watching to see what Monroe intended to do with it. What she intended to do was hold a press conference. She had told friends. She had told her psychiatrist. She had told, fatally, perhaps, Bobby Kennedy himself, in one of the phone calls that took place in the final weeks of her life. She was going to tell everything. Not just about the affairs. Not just about the Kennedy connection. Everything. The Cuba operations. The Mafia arrangement. The secret air base. The things from outer space. All of it. Part 5, The Memo. August 3, 1962. 2 days before her death. James Angleton. The Chief of Counterintelligence for the Central Intelligence Agency, one of the most powerful and feared intelligence officers in American history, signed a classified memo. The memo referenced Monroe by name. It referenced the Kennedy brothers. It referenced her diary. It referenced her stated intention to hold a press conference. And it referenced, in language careful enough to mean everything and prove nothing, the classified information she had been exposed to. The memo was addressed to people whose names remain redacted. The portions of the document that would tell us what was decided in response to Monroe's threat remain classified. On a woman who has been dead for over 60 years. Part 6, The Last Night. August 4, 1962. Monroe spent the day at her Brentwood home. She made phone calls. She received visitors. She spoke to her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who stayed for hours. That evening, she spoke to Peter Lawford on the phone. Her voice, he later said, was slurring. She said something he couldn't quite make out. And then the line went quiet. He called back. No answer. What happened in the hours between that phone call and the moment the police were finally notified, nearly 5 hours later, has never been satisfactorily explained. The phone records from that night were subpoenaed. They disappeared. The Red Diary was never found. Witnesses later placed individuals at her home that night who were never officially interviewed. One of them, multiple sources claimed, worked for the government. The official ruling, probable suicide. Acute barbiturate poisoning. The FBI file on Marilyn Monroe, partially classified to this day. The CIA memo from August 3, partially redacted to this day. The phone records from the night of August 4, missing. The Red Diary, gone. Part 7, What it means. I want to be careful here. I am not telling you that Marilyn Monroe was murdered by the CIA. I am not telling you that the government killed her to protect the secret of Roswell. What I am telling you is this. 2 days before she died, the chief of counterintelligence of the CIA wrote a classified memo about her. The night she died, evidence disappeared. The files that would answer the most important questions are still classified. And the woman at the center of all of it. The woman who had spent her entire life being told she was just a pretty face, just a body, just an object for powerful men to use and discard. Had somehow, without a security clearance, without training, without any of the apparatus of intelligence, gotten closer to the most classified secrets in American history than almost anyone outside the government ever had. That is not nothing. That is extraordinary. She wasn't a spy. She was something far more dangerous. She was a woman who paid attention. In rooms where no one thought she would. The most desired woman in America. The most feared. Subject Monroe. Case closed. Or so they thought. Subscribe. Because next week, the marriage that broke her. Arthur Miller. The brilliant man who said he loved her mind. And what he actually did with it. Some weapons don't make a sound.